MMA UK, I'm here with Chris Davis, black belt professor at Gracie Barra, Gloucester. Chris, how you keeping, my man?
I'm very well, mate. Thanks for coming in and giving me this interview.
Oh, thank you for doing it. It's an honour. Recently got an injury.
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, so as with all things jiu-jitsu, sometimes you just pick up injuries here and there. And I was training on the top floor in a competition class, and a big white belt landed on my foot and broke my foot. So a week before a big competition. So yeah, a bit of a nightmare, but it's one of those things with jiu-jitsu.
I mean, this is it, and I guess with white belts as well, it's one of those things where like they're not really fully understanding there's certain things, or maybe it's just the fact that like they didn't know how they fell was going to fall and just landed on your foot.
Yeah.
So you're going to be out. Do you know how long you'll be out for?
Probably about 4 weeks, I think, something like that. I'm already training a little bit, like gently. Can walk on it fine now, but it's just I have to be very careful about people hitting it or touching it and stuff like that. Yeah. So probably about 4 weeks, and I'll be back to going for it.
Nice. And have you got anything lined up, or is there anything in the pipeline?
Yeah, so I'm doing Masters Worlds this year in end of August, start of September. That'll be in Las Vegas. So that's my big goal this year, to head towards that. So now at black belt level, there's not a lot of competitions that you can actually compete in. There's not a lot of black belts competing. So I'm planning on probably doing the Dublin Open as well in the meantime, and maybe even go over to Barcelona for the Masters Europeans as well. And then that'll sort of set me up for the British, which is in June. And then that will set me up then for the Worlds. So it should be quite good.
Nice. So you got a lot going on, a very busy guy. Before we get into the jiu-jitsu journey, I know you've got some other credentials to your name, and I want to ask you, what has been your journey into martial arts from the beginning?
So started martial arts when I was a little kid, really, which is a lot of people do that with judo and karate. At the time, that was all that was around, really. Yeah. So it was like all you could find is there was no MMA. There was no BJJ to speak of in the UK at that point. So I started in judo, karate, a little bit of kickboxing and boxing and stuff like that. And then in my very late teens, early 20s, I found a very traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu school. And when I say that, I mean real from Japan, traditional jiu-jitsu. We have this idea in the UK that a lot of jiu-jitsu that we see in the UK is traditional jiu-jitsu, but most of that is actually sort of some mix of judo, karate, aikido. The real traditional stuff from Japan is quite rare, really. There's not a lot of it around. So this was a real traditional school where I dived into traditional jiu-jitsu and sword work, iaido, kenjutsu, all these different things. And that's where sort of my real devotion to the martial arts came in. At that point, I was training 5 or 6 times a week, training a couple of hours at home as well every day, trying to work out these interesting Japanese styles of martial art. And from that, one of the aspects of that style was that it was very focused on what you did with your own body. So we think in the martial arts about manipulating other people all the time, and don't consider what we're doing with ourselves very much. And this style was very much about how do you use your body to make an effect on someone else. And that led me into thinking about and investigating some other styles that had that sort of focus, and that's what led me into like Chinese martial arts. So then I ended up diving really deeply into those, met a really good teacher, very powerful guy, proper fighter. We think of sometimes we think of these arts as being sort of mystical, wishy-washy stuff, but this guy was a real tough dude, a real rough fighter, really powerful, hardest striker I've ever met. And I trained with him really, really diligently for 4 or 5 years, and then he moved away. So I started up a little school, started teaching that stuff. And then I sort of came about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because I was like, okay, I used to do a bit of groundwork in judo. Everything that I do is stand up now. And we used to spar a lot and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, I need to figure out this ground stuff. And that's when I came to GB Gloucester. At the time, everyone was a white belt. We didn't have any coloured belts at all in here, And Victor Estima, my professor's head guy, Gareth Neal, was coming down as a brown belt every other week and just showing us stuff and correcting us, and we just had to figure it out on our own. And that's where the jiu-jitsu journey started from that point, and we haven't looked back since.
And so, you spoke about like the other martial arts you've done, other than Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Is there any other black belts you've acquired along the way?
Yeah, so black belt in the Japanese style. So the style of jiu-jitsu, the Japanese style of jiu-jitsu. Also in the Enshin-ryu Iaido, which is like the sword style, and the Itoru Kenjutsu. All of these styles I have black belts in. In the Chinese, there wasn't such a thing as a black belt. Yeah, it was you're either an instructor or you're not, basically. Yeah, so it was a very different sort of thing. They have a different system, really. And you had what we call the closed door people, who were the closest to the expert, and then you have the sort of regular students. So I was sort of more in that closed door group with my instructor. So although there's no belt there, that I went on to be an instructor myself. So that would essentially be a black belt, really. And a lot of teachers from the local area would come to my class because I had a very good understanding of those arts. So even teachers with 30 years experience became my student. And that sort of led me into this idea of this other thing that I teach, which is called martial body, which is all about, again, controlling your own body to make sure that you can maximize the effect of things like your body weight and stuff like that when you're doing jiu-jitsu or judo or striking or whatever it might be. So they had a really good basis for what I later went on to teach. And if anyone who rolls with me and stuff, you feel the body weight and all that sort of thing, and the ability to utilize your body mass very clearly. That's all comes from that focus on what you're doing with yourself rather than just manipulating your partner. So all of that sort of comes from that experience and that training in all those different arts.
Yeah, wow, fair play. And so within those sort of martial arts, did you ever delve on like things like Kung Fu or like Wing Chun? Did you ever go down those avenues?
So the arts that I studied in China, the Chinese arts. So Kung Fu is like a general term. It just sort of means it means hard work, but its general term is it means martial arts in China. Like in Japan is Budo or Bujitsu means martial arts. In China, Kung Fu means martial arts. So there's hundreds of different styles, from Shui Jiao, which is like judo, very similar. Sanshou, which is like kickboxing. All of these are considered Kung Fu. And the styles that I studied were Xingyi, Tai Chi, and Bagua. Tai Chi is very famous, more for old people in the park moving around, but the style I studied was nothing like that. It was very fast, very powerful. And then the other two styles are sort of related, northern Chinese styles of Kung Fu. Wing Chun is a southern style, so it's a different sort of lineage away from the Shaolin Temple style stuff, whereas the styles I studied were more related to the Taoists rather than the Buddhists. So it's all Kung Fu. Yeah. I have experience of training with Wing Chun guys and stuff like that, but these styles are quite distinct from Wing Chun.
Okay, fair enough. And like, it's one of those things, I guess, now because of the internet and the day and age we live in, there's more light on those sorts of martial arts. Like you obviously have like the famous people like Bruce Lee. You've got the movies like Ip Man, who highlights like Wing Chun. And I guess in that sense, it's nice to see those things being exposed to like the wider audience of the world. And moving on now, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, how it's developed and grown over the years. Obviously, you've got the MMA side of things where that's obviously boosted, that highlighted the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu game. But speaking about your past in martial arts and now your present in Jiu-Jitsu, I guess you can really see how that's brought your game into Jiu-Jitsu when you talk about how you control your body. And Jiu-Jitsu is about controlling your opponent, but it is also about how you react, how you initially react to what's going to become a fight or competition. So I suppose in this sense, you started off as a white belt. I'm sure at that time as well, you probably remained a white belt for quite a long period of time. How was your journey in Jiu-Jitsu? So moving on from white to blue, purple, brown.
So one of the things that I think is present now, which wasn't present when I started, was a lot of gyms have black belts, sat there with them all the time. So if someone has a problem with a technique that they need to address, they'll go to their instructor, their professor, and say, how do I fix this? When I started, and I actually think it was a big benefit, we didn't have that opportunity. We would see Gareth maybe every other week, Victor maybe 2-3 times a year, and in between that, we were trying to work out the game for ourselves, and we were trying to figure out where the holes were, how to plug the holes, and then we would see Gareth and we'd say, this is what we come up with, and he'd be like, nah, it's all wrong, try this, But the struggle itself helps you to understand the technique, because this is something that I found throughout my journey. When I would go to compete, me and my training bro Valdemar, me and him were training a lot together, and we would go and compete a lot, especially at blue belt. I remember 1 3-month period we competed almost every weekend, and that would give us good questions. The competition is not just about winning the medal. It's about coming away with a good question that you can go and ask an instructor, or you can go and research for yourself. And so when we started, it was all questions, And then as you progress through the belts, the questions get less and less, but they become more precise, And I think that's the way that things have changed over time, is that you've gone from this situation where almost everyone in the UK, apart from like very select gyms, were really having to struggle to find the information and train. They had to work things out for themselves and come up with ways to solve problems. And then now it's much more, a lot of people walk into a gym and see three or 4 black belts, and they just think that that's normal, But as you know, back in the day, there wasn't any black belts. It was all blue belts and purple belts, So I think that's an interesting part of our journey here, is that we came from that, especially some of the older guys that have been in the journey the whole time. We came from that situation where you had to figure things out for yourself. And I still use that today. People often ask me, how do I train? Because I'm with brown, purple, blue belts, And a lot of what I try to do is put myself into positions, even if I'm sparring with a white belt, where I know I'm deficient. I know my game has a hole there. And then I put myself there and I work on things to try and fill that hole, to try and make sure that gap in my game gets sorted out. And again, a lot of that comes from competing and making sure that you put yourself in positions where it's not the guys at the gym that you're training with, it's someone else that has never seen your game before. And then when you roll with them, and they might have their own game, suddenly, is it matched? Can you deal with it? Yeah. And then you really find out where the holes in your game are. And I think that's the way that people should sort of approach jiu-jitsu a little bit,
I guess especially when you reach that level as well, it's like, you could go into a session and fight someone that's white, blue, purple, brown, and end the fight pretty quickly. But I get from other people that train and compete in jiu-jitsu as well, it's more about how you develop and how you grow and keep growing as a martial artist. So you've achieved the black belt. Congratulations. I know it's been a while now, but we get that on record. Thanks. How does it feel? Because it's one of the hardest belts, if not the hardest belt to get in martial arts and all. And coming from a background where you've had extensive sort of history in achieving and developing and growing as a martial artist, you've now reached this plateau where you've achieved a black belt. There are other belts after, but how does that feel?
It's an amazing experience to receive. It's something that you work towards your whole time when you're doing jiu-jitsu. I've always had the sort of feeling, and I know Murray is the same, that the belt, as like Hoist Gracie says, it only covers 2 inches of your ass. The rest you got to defend with skill. So I always had that sort of feeling, but at the same time, there is something uniquely special about the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, different to the other belts that I've received. It takes more of yourself to achieve. You have to put a huge amount of mat time in. You have to put a huge amount of blood, sweat, and tears into the art to gain the sort of understanding that warrants you having that belt around your waist. So it definitely meant a lot to me. I can assure everybody that when you get it, all of the purple belts and blue belts and brown belts try to murder you every session, because they want that scalp. So it doesn't get any easier, certainly. and it's certainly not the end of the journey. And the reason I'm competing a lot still, trying to compete a lot, is because I know that there's plenty for me to learn. You know, that it doesn't represent an end, it's a new beginning. And some people say, you know, it's the foundations mastered. And then now we need to make the jiu-jitsu your own, you know. So that's where I see it.
Yeah, that's very well put, and that's a different sort of outlet I was expecting to hear. So like that's quite nice to hear as well. And as someone that competes in jiu-jitsu and trains in jiu-jitsu, it's good to know that, like, you know, it's not the end of the road, it's the beginning of a new one. So black belt in jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu and all. Outside of the gym, do you feel like it's impacted or influenced or done anything to your life outside of the gym?
I think the reality of training jiu-jitsu, no matter what belt you are, it gets something out of the system, for men especially, you know. We can often walk around with, you know, thinking about things, and we don't let that out. And I've done quite a lot of different things for charity for men's mental health and stuff like that. And I think that going into a gym, rolling, getting all that energy out in a safe way, and then everybody who trains jiu-jitsu knows you leave that gym tired and your mind is clear and you just feel, okay, now I'm good, you know. And I think that is something that from the start of the journey I always felt was beneficial to me, you know. I think that the reality of being able to have an outlet like that is so valuable that, you know, a lot of people may turn to medicine or something when just getting the energy out of your system, coming into a gym and making sure that you dedicate your time to the mats may be a good answer for the problems that may be weighing on your mind. You can't think of anything else when someone's trying to choke you unconscious, you know? There's no other option. You've got to think about the choke or the armbar, and that quietens the mind, that puts all those other things to one side, and when you leave the gym, they're still at one side, at least for the time being. And I think that's a really big bonus, not just for me, but for my students and the people I teach.
Fair enough. And so, like, you know, you mentioned your pupils and your students, as well as being someone that's a black belt in comp and in training. How does it feel to be a coach under the prestigious title of Gracie Barra as well, you know, world renowned? How has that journey been?
I've been coaching since sort of blue belt, really. You know, as I say, in the early days of the gym, there wasn't any really big colored belts. So before that, I had my own little school teaching Chinese art. So I've been coaching martial arts for a long time, but I take my responsibilities as a coach very, very seriously. I think that you've had Eli on before. You know, he's one of my students that I'm, you know, grooming to become a really high level champion. And I think that responsibility of the coach to cater for the students' needs on an individual basis, help them develop as individuals, make sure that they are good-centered people as well as good athletes, and making sure that they hold to the values of things like Gracie Barra is a really big responsibility. And I take it very, very seriously, as I know Murray does. And it's a joy for me to see and be at competition and see my students compete, you know. We went to a competition not long ago and Haas got gold, you know, brilliant effort. And I think that seeing that sort of thing, you probably saw in me how happy I was about it. You know, I'm as happy to see my students win as myself, if not more so. And I take it super serious. And I think that being a coach is a responsibility that you can't just turn up and do a bit and then get on your phone. You have to be in the room with your students, working hard and making sure that they're getting the best out of themselves. Part of that for me is training with them. You know, when we do competition sessions or something, I'll be in there training with them every time. I don't expect them to do anything that I wouldn't do myself. Yeah. So a lot of them have seen me come up through the belts anyway, seen how much I compete. So they know that that's the way I treat jiu-jitsu myself, and I think that rubs off on them a little bit as well. But it's a serious responsibility, and I think people should remember that. And if you're a coach, people are looking up to you all the time, so you need to be able to make sure that you give them a good experience.
Yeah, and I guess as well with a sport like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it's something that you really want to nourish and care your students, because you can get hurt and you can get injured, and you can leave the gym with a bad taste if you haven't received that sort of good level of service. But I tend to find in most jiu-jitsu gyms or even most martial arts gyms, there's a sense, especially in the Brazilian jiu-jitsu community, there is that sense of community where people will look after each other. They even become good friends outside of the gym, and you can see how it affects people from a sporting perspective, but also from a personal perspective and how they develop as a person. So as a coach, you must have some bugbears. Is there something for new guys coming in? Is there some things like some sort of like hints or advice you would give them coming in?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things really. Mat time is a big thing. So don't expect to walk into a jiu-jitsu gym and smash the blue belts even. Yeah, it doesn't matter what you've done before. The idea is that you walk into that gym and you empty your cup and you receive the teaching that the person's given you. Yeah. So people say leave the ego at the door. Jiu-jitsu will make you leave the ego at the door at some point. You know. So that's a good starting point, to go in with no expectation of your greatness. Yeah. So you go in and you just say, okay, I'm going to go in here and learn, regardless of what you've done before. That's what I had to do when I came into the gym. I was a black belt in Japanese Jiu-Jitsu. Gareth absolutely smashed me, and I was like, okay, fair enough, you know, that's where we are. So that's the first thing, I think. Secondly is like really pay attention to the safety situation in the gym. We have this onboarding process where we're like, these are the things you don't want to do. Not because they're too dangerous for the gym, but just at the start of training, you don't have the control to control your submissions. You know, you're not going to smack on an arm bar and break someone's arm just because you were trying to win the roll. So pay attention to the safety, pay attention to the etiquette and the things to do inside the gym, and then you can't help but succeed. You know, you put the mat time in, you look after your training partners, you make sure that they're able to train the next day just like you are, and then suddenly you get better. But if every time you walk into the gym, you got the big ego and you want to hurt everyone because I can't believe that, you know, lady beat me or whatever it might be, you're never going to improve. A, you'll probably get chucked out, and B, your ego won't let you open your mind enough to learn jiu-jitsu. So leave the ego at the door, listen to the instructors, make sure that you're following the etiquette and the rules and the health and safety of the gym, and put the mat time in. That's as simple as it is.
Yeah, and it's crucial on the safety element as well. Like, I think I've known a few people that have come into the gym and they're quite eager to learn. And they've had like one or two bad experiences with other people training, and it's kind of put them off. And when you know how much jiu-jitsu gives you, it's sad to say that like people, like, you know, they turn away from it because of that experience. So no, it's a really good emphasis on that, and I wouldn't stress that. I would stress that even more, just because it is just like the logo says, jiu-jitsu is for everyone, and it is. You get shapes and sizes of all sorts of backgrounds and people, and I think everyone's entitled to it, and what a wonderful sport it is. As a coach, you had the obstacle of COVID. Talk to me about that, because I know that was quite a difficult situation for many gyms across the world. But specifically in your case, how did you manage that?
So it was very hard for the gym. You know, I'm lucky I'm an instructor here, but I'm not responsible for the rent and all that sort of stuff. And I know that from our point of view as a gym, it was a difficult time. But what we tried to do was provide a service, and Gracie Barra as an organization was brilliant, because they put up a training portal where you could go online and see different techniques and train solo training, and they'd have guest instructors and all these different things. So the resources behind an organization like Gracie Barra, which is so big and international, really got thrown behind this problem. And we ended up with a great resource in Gracie Barra online that was able to allow people to log in and train from their own homes with world-class instructors, you know, like my Professor Victor or Braulio or all these different people. So it sort of gave people an opportunity to interact with these world-class instructors in a situation that was not allowing them to do jiu-jitsu, you know. And then when we were able to open, but it was only solo training and you could only have 6 people on the mat, you know, it was a test for me because I wanted to make sure that people came away from those sessions with the same sort of vibrant happiness that they got from training jiu-jitsu. So we used to do a lot of drills and time drills and all these different things, and creating movements that would be really relevant to jiu-jitsu practice, without the ability to interact with someone. We got grappling dummies and all that sort of stuff as well. And what I'll say is we've got people in the gym now who started during that time. You know, they wanted to do jiu-jitsu, they knew everything was locked down, and they started with us doing solo drills. And their movement and their jiu-jitsu is really good, you know, because they got that down at the start. As I was saying earlier, it's a lot of it's about what I do with myself, not just what I do manipulating someone else. And those people had that opportunity to do something with themselves first, master their own movement before they even touched another person, you know. And then when they came to do the movements with another person, they were already a step ahead than someone just coming into a normal class. So I think there was definite problems and really, you know, hard times for every gym. But I think coming out of it, there were also positives. And I always like to look at the positive side to it rather than to dwell on that hard time, you know. So I think there was positives in terms of those movement classes, and certainly it gave me an opportunity to try to grow as an instructor and understand how to teach that movement a bit better.
Brilliant. So in the mixed martial arts world, you now have a sport that is very dominant and very watched all over in mixed martial arts, in MMA. As someone like yourself that has so much experience in a variety of martial arts, does that ever cross your mind to compete? Or, you know, I know you guys do some level of striking as well, but does that ever cross your mind that you would stumble into MMA?
I think I'm too old now, right? So I used to think about it, you know, when I was in my early 30s. I'm in my 40s now, and it's one of those things that I now value the experience of training jiu-jitsu and the competitive edge of jiu-jitsu and coaching more than I value moving into that sort of new area. I'd love to do it, and I do spar with guys here, and we've had a couple of guys here do some amateur events. And certainly when they were preparing, I like to spar with them and have a play around. I use my heavy strikes and all that sort of stuff and give them a bit of a problem from the old man. But the thought of doing it myself, I think I'm past that, unfortunately.
And so, as well as like MMA, and you've got the competition side of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I know you're very traditional in your approach in martial arts, but what's your thoughts on Nogi? Is that something you compete in as well? Yeah,
so I won the British in Nogi, and I've competed in Nogi quite a lot. I think Nogi is a really integral part of any jiu-jitsu gym. Every gym should have a Nogi section to what they do, and we train Nogi on Monday nights, and a lot of people on the open mats will train Nogi and roll Nogi. I think that there's a sort of thought that Nogi is somehow more interesting than gi or whatever, because gi can be quite slow sometimes. But I think that's mainly down to the rule set. There was a rule set called Coppa Podio, most exciting jiu-jitsu I've ever seen, and that was mainly gi stuff. It was just the rule set made everyone go for submissions all the time. And obviously with the prevalence of leg locks and stuff, we have to learn that stuff. We have to learn to defend it. So we do learn all that stuff and make sure that's part of our training. And for me, and like the way I train, if I can do it no-gi, I can translate that into gi, but you can't translate a lot of gi into no-gi. Yeah, a lot of gi is like lapel guard and stuff where the grips are sort of dependent for the technique. So a lot of gi training you can't translate across, whereas a lot of gi training you can. So I think that's why, from my perspective, I like to make it sort of 70-30, 70% gi, 30% no-gi. If I was doing MMA, it would all be no-gi. Yeah. And if someone is only interested in no-gi, submission-only grappling and stuff like that, of course, all your time needs to be spent on that. If you're a general jiu-jitsu practitioner, then in my opinion, you want to experience both, train both, and the 70-30 split or the 60-40 split will give you the opportunity to learn all those little things that are gi dependent, but also give you that opportunity to work on some of the stuff that is very useful in no gi, and then you can translate that back to the gi training.
And with the Nogi, it's obviously become a huge thing as well commercially with like loads of different events. You know, you got I was going to say ADDC there, but that's totally not it. ADDC. ADCC,
Yeah.
and then you've got things like Grapple Fest that have come up, and you've got all these other sort of events. Now, I know in the IBJJF rule set, heel hooks and things of those nature are illegal. What's your thoughts on that? Because obviously I know in Gracie Barra as well, traditional, you know, it's not something you aim to teach maybe, or in the sense of the competitions you aim to go on is not something you're going to be using. But what's your general thought on like things like heel hook and the things you come across in Nogi?
Yeah, so I do teach that on Mondays. You know, at the moment we're doing a lot of knee bars and stuff like that. Actually, IBJJF have just changed their rule set. So at black belt level now, heel hooks, knee reaps, all those things are legal. So it's something, especially for brown belts that we have here, they need to start learning now if they're going to compete. So we are actively involved in working on our leg lock game. It's something that I research a lot and I'm quite interested in. But again, I think that you have to put your energy into the right place. And for us, we're mainly a gi gym, and in gi jiu-jitsu, things like heel hooks don't really come up so much. And I think there's a few different reasons for that. But at the same time, you have, as a coach, you're responsible for developing students to the way that they want to go. If we had a lot of students that wanted to do sub only, like Naga and stuff like that, then we would be putting a lot of emphasis on that sort of game. As it stands, we don't have a lot of students that are interested in that sort of stuff. So although we train it a lot on Mondays and in the open mat, you know, if I'm rolling with some of the guys like Eli or Conrad, you know, we'll say, yeah, let's go heel hooks, everything, and we'll just open it up, which gives us opportunity to work on our games. It's certainly not a focus of the gym in the way that it would be at somewhere like 10th Planet or something like that, you know, where everything they do is based around that sort of rule set and that sort of approach. So I think it'd be a mistake to think that GB doesn't have those sorts of things. You know, we've got athletes that are top tier level athletes competing in Nogi events and winning, you know. So one of our guys just beat Craig Jones, for instance. So, you know, it's like we do have that side to jiu-jitsu in Gracie Barra, but it's certainly not a focus for this specific gym.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that as well, because I think a lot of people are in the mindset, I know I was until you just said that like heel hooks and knee bars and things of the dark arts, if you like, are almost not forbidden, but kind of frowned upon in this gym, in a Gracie Barra gym. But I guess what you're saying is specific to a gym. If the demand is there, then it can be taught and it will be taught. So closing up, Chris, you know, you're doing extremely well. The gym is doing extremely well. It sounds like martial arts has really given you a variety in life and many wonders, if you like. But as now a professor in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, a black belt, is there anything outside of Jiu-Jitsu, but obviously the influence of Jiu-Jitsu you'd like to achieve? Is there anything like you would want to, is there any goals or aspiration other than competing in tournaments that you want to achieve within Jiu-Jitsu?
Yeah, I want to create a world champion. Yeah, I want one of my students to win worlds, and that's now my focus is very much on developing my students and the people that I'm responsible for coaching. That's what I care about now more than even my own competitive career, you know. Purple belt and blue belt, all I cared about was competing, you know, but now I still want to test myself. I still want to find the holes in my game, but more important to me is making sure that the people in the gym that really want to be the best in the world have that opportunity. And as a coach, I give them all of my attention so that they can achieve those goals, you know. And seeing one of my students on the podium at a major competition, that will be the icing on the cake for my jiu-jitsu journey, I think.
Wow, would be a hell of an achievement for yourself, for the organisation, and obviously for your students. I want to thank you for your time, and I really look forward to seeing what you do as a coach and a competitor, and as well as what Gracie Barra Gloucester produces and brings to the table of the Jiu-Jitsu world. Thank you, and hopefully we'll catch up in the future.
No worries.
Take care, Chris.
Cheers.